Okay, I think we make a start. So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This is webinar 3 of the Sonar-Cities project. And so we've had the two previous webinars have been really interesting. I think lots of the people here today have attended those webinars. So the purpose of the webinars is to follow each stage of the Sonar-Cities project. So the Sonar-Cities project is there to it's a practical research project there to build tools and capacity building for cities to respond to crises and to work with vulnerable populations in their response to a range of crises. And we are building on historical knowledge about how previous existing crises have been experienced and how the response to those crises has been experienced. But beyond that, building a set of tools and training and capacity building infrastructure in order to develop crisis response, crisis preparedness that really incorporates the needs of vulnerable populations, which is a big question. It's a big practical challenge, but we're really interested in it, and the work so far is really interesting. There's been lots going on. We're just getting into now one of the really exciting stages of the project, which is around the co-creation with different vulnerable groups in specific city contexts of tools and training. And so that's really at the core of the project, is co-creating these tools with the people who need to use them. So with that in mind, the webinar series, as some of you will be familiar with, have attended these events before, gives insight into the process of Sonar-Cities as it's happening. It's also a really important part of the method that we've adopted in Sonar-Cities of working with communities, of co-creation, of really opening up the process of not just adopting and implementing tools, but actually designing tools that are really context specific and really practically usable and accessible. It's a way of engaging with different groups to reflect on how we can improve and iterate on this method, and it's building a set of relationships and networks that we can take on to the future. So I'm not going to spend too much more time talking about that, because it's very interesting, but we have lots of really exciting, interesting stuff to talk about today. We're going to focus on the work that we've done in Sonar-Cities across two of the partners. So the University of Amsterdam, where I'm based, where we've been mapping a set of trainings for crisis response, looking at what's existing out there already, and seeing what are the commonalities, what are some of the challenges. And my colleague Selma is going to talk about that in just a second. And then that will be followed by a presentation. Here we are. That will be followed by a presentation from colleagues at the University of Ljubljana, who have been doing a similar exercise, mapping the existing tools that are used, that are available for cities to prepare, respond to, and recover from crises. There's lots of really interesting work in both of those pieces of research. And so that's going to be really interesting to hear about. But where it's going to get really exciting actually is in the discussion and learning with and from everyone in the room. So after those two presentations, which will take, I think, about half an hour, we will go into breakout groups, and I'll explain more about how those breakout groups are going to work when the time comes. But there will be 3 breakout rooms which will focus on what trainings and what tools have been useful in your experience before a crisis, during a crisis, and after a crisis. So there will be 3 breakout groups that you will get to choose from. We will spend about 15 to 20 minutes discussing some questions in those breakout groups. They will be facilitated, and there will be people taking notes. We will then come back to a plenary discussion where we'll feedback from what's gone on in those breakout groups. And then there will be time, there'll be a decent amount of time for us to have a discussion all together as a group and to reflect on what's useful about the existing trainings and tools, what's challenging. Really crucially, though, and how this feeds into the Sonar-Cities project as it goes on. How do we build on what we know and what we've experienced to develop a set of training and a set of tools that can be useful, relevant, that can meet the needs of different populations, can be accessible, and crucially can be sustainable, can really embed and be very useful into the future, because that's what we're here to do in Sonar-Cities. So I'm really pleased that you're all here. I'm looking forward to the discussion immensely. We'll say a little bit more, as I said, about how those breakout groups will work when the time comes. But now I'm going to hand over first to my colleague Selma to introduce herself and to tell us a little bit about the trainings that have been mapped.
Yes, hi, hello everybody, and thank you, Andrew. So yes, to start us off, as will be mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done in terms of mapping existing trainings out there as Sonar-Cities to understand, first of all, the state of the art. What does it mean that there are online trainings for mapping out for disaster preparedness and health emergencies? How do they view vulnerability? But also, what are the gaps then that we will be trying to fill when we're thinking about our own training and toolkit development? So first, I'm going to say a little bit about what this is, what we've done, and what the point was. I'm going to go very quickly through our method, and then I'm going to look at 3 lenses through which we've been thinking about the trainings to understand where we can go to from here. So what we've done is we've looked at online trainings in terms of health disaster and health emergencies and disaster preparedness, and as well as the topic of vulnerability, whether it is prevalent, whether it is mentioned, and how it is addressed. We've done so so the training serves as a connection node within the Sonar-Cities project, as we're trying to inform co-creation stakeholder board work and toolkit development. It will help us develop our MOOC, a training of our own. And finally, we've tried to create a repository to put all of these trainings that may be relevant across different places in one place for people to easily access. To paint a picture of the insight we've gained from this, I have the main findings listed here that maybe we can keep in mind as we go through the lenses I've just mentioned. The first one is that vulnerability is addressed either sporadically or superficially. This means that when it is part of a training, it's merely mentioned as a definition. Rarely is it unpacked or explicitly showcased in the application of what the training aims to cover. At the same time, as trainings become more rooted in a local context, so if it is a training from a specific city or place on a very specific narrowed down topic, then vulnerabilities become also very well defined. So it may be a training in one place on, for example, the challenges to individuals with disabilities or the elderly. However, the broader the training, the more abstract and removed the concept of vulnerability is, which also removes it from sort of the active thinking with and thinking towards tackling issues of vulnerability in disaster preparedness. So very quickly, initially the project looked at 500 trainings globally and about 365 local trainings that were sent in by partners. However, to fit within the scope of the Sonar-Cities project, they were narrowed down using specific keywords, as you can see in the table here. And then the analysis went through two criteria, so training background and definition of vulnerability, to sort of make it even more relevant to the topic. And then all of these trainings, after we've analyzed them and mapped them out in relation to each other into our project, were put onto an online repository, which is now available online for all of you. I don't know if you can, yeah, so I don't think the image can be clicked through Zoom, but I'm going to send now a link on the chat. There we go. Through which you can access our repository where we have these trainings now, and whenever you have time, if you'd like to check them out, see if there's anything there of use or interest to you. From now on, this repository hopefully will be continuously used and added and expanded onto so that we can see the connections in real time and add our own trainings as we develop them. And now, without further ado, I would like to tackle these 3 lenses that I've mentioned about how we can think about training for disaster preparedness. The first one is accessibility, which comes in 2 forms, or rather has 2 shapes. The first one is the literal ease of access. Can you find it? Can you use it? And how easy is it to use it? All the trainings we've looked at are online, so that requires an internet connection. It requires some sort of internet literacy. Some of them, not many, but some are behind paywalls, which requires either individuals paying for that or institutions ensuring access, depending on whether somebody is part of such a specialized institution. And almost all of them require some sort of account creation. This may be discouraging to some, but also has benefits for privacy reasons, for the people who put the training out there. But again, it can deter maybe the incentive to go on with it if you're just a member of the general citizenry wanting to partake in such trainings. Then there's the formats. What does it look like? How attractive is it? Does it let you test the knowledge you've learned? Does it force you to sit through specific aspects you maybe already know or aren't that interested in? And of course, how accessible is it to a broad range of individuals? Does it provide captions or text-to-speech options? Can you change the font, the colors? Can it suit your specific needs? I've attached here 3 images. So these are kind of the main big broad lines of what trainings can appear as. So sometimes they come in colorful pop-ups with animations and videos. Yeah, that have a lot going on, but are very, very highly interactive. Other times they can be like you see in the corner, right? Just a simple HTML page, very, very straightforward, very simple. This one usually requires no paywall, no account, or something a little bit more, let's say, polished, where here you have a specific training that had the ability to view the transcript in real time, search through it, copy it as a note, also offering video at the same time. So the idea of looking at accessibility is, first of all, we don't know what each individual would prefer. We don't know what kind of format works best for specific audiences. We just know what's out there. And when thinking of our own needs, we'd like to ponder, okay, what does accessibility mean in relation to the participation and content? So participation in the trainings comes again twofold, input and output. In terms of who participates in the creation of a training, the involvement or input of those who the training is aimed to help usually does not include is usually not included. I can't say for sure because this is an absence that we've noticed. Usually these trainings are made public, and in the details of the training, you don't really know how much of the information was gotten through collaboration, how much of it is directly related to what people actually claim that they need. At the same time, these trainings are also not designed for the vulnerable populations themselves, which makes sense, as having to do extra trainings to have to ensure your own resilience just exacerbates vulnerabilities and the burden of your own responsibility. However, we find that it is worth pondering whether this is always the case or whether different approaches to participation may prove more effective and appealing overall for trainings in preparedness. And then in terms of content, yeah, the main point of trainings themselves, right? Content. There is a lot of variation in it, and we have kind of seen that it relates to who the target audience is. So we're trying to integrate a more interdisciplinary thinking when approaching topics of health and vulnerability. But from what we are seeing so far is that even trainings that are aimed to be more interdisciplinary stick within very, very related fields. Again, this makes sense because of the target audience. For example, I've linked here an image from a course in health and complex humanitarian emergencies. This is for people who have some pre-existing knowledge of health sciences. And even though the modules they go through sort of vary in their main disciplinary approach, they still share an interrelated field. They've tried and attempted to insert a social science lens at times, yet again, without fully unpacking it. But the more specialized the audience, the more we find that there is space for a little bit of interdisciplinarity. And then the more general the audience is, then the more simple the content becomes. And then the question begins to be, okay, how do we do something that's interdisciplinary? How can we showcase it in a manner that is simple but not dumbed down, accessible but not superficial? And indeed, a lot of the global trainings draw from contexts that are non-European, or so there the content is not necessarily applicable to what our project is trying to think about and the resilience that we're trying to build. Therefore, a lot of thinking is necessary in what does interdisciplinarity mean in this context, and what does it mean in terms of effectiveness? How can it actually be useful to think through a lens of multiple disciplines, or is it really when we think about target audiences that may just be very specialized in one domain or field? So finally, we thought through these lenses to reach these 3 main takeaways from our training exercise, which I will just read out now. So the first one, vulnerable populations are either narrowly defined as a target group or omitted altogether. To incorporate the needs of different populations, they should participate in the creation process of trainings without overburdening their pre-existing vulnerabilities. Second, vulnerability needs to be accounted for at all times, dynamically and situated in context, not as an afterthought or static category. And third, identifying relevant audiences and needs, as well as strategic scales of development, is necessary to prioritize effectiveness of training provision. Tried to keep this presentation short just to showcase, first of all, that there are many trainings out there. However, their current relevance to the Sonar-Cities project is really in terms of how we think about it, how we can further develop and help our participants to build preparedness. And I've kept the discussion short to sort of just offer these main points and to hear mainly from you what you think is necessary, who it's necessary for, and what kind of trainings actually produce interaction and conversation on these topics. And now, Andrew, I will hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful, Selma. Thank you so much. So there's, as Selma kind of hints at, there's such a big range and variety of trainings out there that we want to learn from and build on, and it really gets to the heart of what Sonar-Cities is about. Is that capacity building. Connected to the development of new tools for responding to crisis. So it's really crucial, and it's really interesting. I should say that we at the University of Amsterdam are leading on work package 5, part of which focuses on building up a set of training, so a MOOC, which Salma mentioned, as well as doing these webinars and some other elements of the project. Now, we've talked about trainings. The other component of today's webinar is tools. So I'm going to hand over to partners from Ljubljana. So Ursa and Ursula are going to talk about the tools that they've mapped. So a similar exercise to Selma, but focusing on the tools. Again, a really crucial part of what Sonar-Cities is about. So I'm looking forward to this. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon to everybody. I would, yes, as Andrew already said, together with Ursa Valic, we are presenting our mapping of the tools. And we prepared this presentation together with our colleagues, Pia Krampel and Nishka Strutz. First of all, I would like to say that we had these main questions. Which are the tools used in cases of disasters, crises, and emergencies? Why do we need them? And how do we use them? So we had 2 main methods, that's desk research and interviews with key actors, as you can see here, first responders, city-state representatives, and many others in our 6 cities. At the same time, and more importantly, we were mapping tools that were related to health emergencies, disasters, preparedness, and response in our 6 cities. As you know, from the last webinars, Groningen was and is still focused on earthquakes and COVID. Ljubljana, we are focused on floods and COVID as health disaster. Stockholm on COVID, Udine on climate-induced emergencies and COVID, Vienna on heat waves and COVID, and Zagreb on earthquakes and COVID. So we, besides these disasters and emergencies, and of course cities, we also focused on the question of vulnerabilities and health issues. So the problem here, among others, were certain limitations. We have, of course, very limited time for mapping. We were mapping from approximately January to March last year, and we could include only publicly available tools. So you can see here from these pictures that the tools were in very different formats. Under the number 1, you can see there is an app for elderly people during COVID. This is an app from Sweden. Then you can see the second is Italian example, Io non rischio, I don't risk, best practices of civil protection from Italian partners. Then it's a poster. Here you can see tips for cooling down during the heat waves, and it's from Vienna. And the next format is a manual, creation manual, Psychologička prva pomoć, psychological first aid and support in times of crisis. And there were also many web pages, among our tools. Here is under number 5 web page that educates about first aid from Netherlands, and the last is from Slovenia. It's a social media Facebook page. Poiščimo domove za živali. Let's find home for animals during floods in Slovenia. So besides these formats, we also encountered leaflets, brochures, newsletters, trainings, and other things. And you can see from this table, we gathered 287 tools. And in the first column, you can see that each of the partners, of course, was focused on different disasters and emergencies. And you can see that all of us were focused on COVID. So the highest number was related to COVID, but also we found out that there are many multi-hazard approaches in our tools. And if we look on the other columns, you can see that they are, as I said, in different formats, but mainly or most, there were many in text format, but also video, website, and apps and other. So the question, who is the tool intended for, is very, very important and very relevant. And we saw that they were intended mainly for individuals, but also some of them were focused on institutions. And the question, what is the tool addressing? So which stage of disaster and emergency is addressing? And you can see that there are some related and focused on preparedness, some on response, and some on recovery, but the majority is on response. So there is a lot to talk about, not only regarding this table, but also regarding other aspects of our research. But I would like to hand over to Ursula, who will present examples of good practices of some of the tools.
So hello, thank you, Ursula, and hello also from my side. I will go very quickly through the examples of good practice of the tools that partner organizations, the researchers, have presented to us. So the first one is from Slovenia. It's an interactive web page that it's meant for preparedness and response to disasters, and it's meant for general public. However, it can be interesting for young people because it included some elements of gamifications. It includes also sign language, so it's also accessible for people who are hard of hearing or deaf. However, this web page in all, it's not accessible to people with visual impairments. So it's kind of also missing the web content accessibility guideline standards, which makes the things less accessible that are expected. The other tool already presented a bit was or is a poster format from Vienna. To these posters is from a point of view of accessibility and co-creation very interesting because it was done in relation or in interaction with people who actually experience heat waves. And actually, it's also accessible in 3 different languages. It also employs some kind of easy language. But however, even it's rich in visual format, maybe this could pose some limitations to people with visual impairments. The multilingual manual was also made in Ljubljana. We presented because it's a very interested co-working or co-creation manual that was done in relation with healthcare workers and anthropologists and migrants. It targets mostly healthcare workers and patients in 8 other languages, among which also non-European languages. And it uses also pictograms for people who cannot or who have problems with speaking. and it's mostly used in healthcare institutions. But the limitation is that it's only a manual in PDF or print format, so it's not developed in app and used widely. Another project and material that it's going from this project is an international project that was made by 3 states, Slovenia, Croatia, and Montenegro. The material is mostly target people with disabilities, especially on terms of preparedness and response for people with disabilities, but as well as a training for first responders, which it's a kind of problem because the information for people with disabilities and first responders sometimes overlap, which causes a bit of, let's say, misunderstanding to whom this information is, for whom this information is meant. It's very interesting because it uses a lot of formats. So you can find here audio, video formats, leaflets, text, and so on. And it was a kind of co-creation project that included also people with disabilities, especially people representatives from the Organization of People with Disabilities, first responders, and policymakers. It's accessible in sign language, audio description, easy language formats, and also in pictograms. So it is this multimodality that makes it maybe more accessible than other tools. Another app, we have another app here. It's 112, Where Are You? This app was, let's say, made in Italy, but it's meant to use internationally. It's also adapted in a 17 language plus Italian. And the plus of this is that the app can be used also in terms or in situation when people cannot speak or have problems to speak. For example, it can be used also 2 or 4 people with who are deaf or hard of hearings, because you can use a chat. So the application also helps to localize people who have an emergency, and actually it can be used so without any phone calls on anything. It's based on a personal profile. And the last 2 are 2 tools that were made for children and also parents. So the first one was made in Sweden, or was presented by Swedish partners, but it was a tool that was made through international organizations that deal with children, especially research and raising aware campaigns against children's sexual exploitation through internet during the COVID. So basically what they done were TikTok and YouTube videos, and also informative brochures in 16 languages, which were actually very useful for children who do not speak Swedish, and because of using of social media, of course, they were meant for they were adapted for young people and children, but probably the element of visual and audiovisual elements were not probably let's say accessible to people to young people with visual and hearing impairments. And the last tool that I will present today, it's a tool from Netherlands, Becoming Wiser About Earthquakes. This is actually more a lesson program or a teaching material that gives teaching material to children or parents and also to teachers on better preparedness to earthquakes. It has a very clear target audience, and it includes a variety of materials like videos, stories, text, pictures. And some of them are also engaged children with their children view on topic, another question. So this means that it's also the language is accessible to children. There is great multimodal presentation, which they have also a statement on accessibility, and it's stated that they provide digital accessibility through web content accessibility guideline standards, and this material should be accessible to people who are colorblind and have motoric impairments. So it was just a quick look and in just a few, let's say, tools that we were analyzing. So I will just sum up some main findings that we think they are important. So one big topic was, as addressed in the previous section, also vulnerability was a very, very big topic here. So we find out that there is really a unclear and inconsistent approach to vulnerability. So on one hand, vulnerability is treated as an implicit or situational concept. So it gives a very broader view on what vulnerability is. While on the other hand, there is a mentioning of vulnerable groups without actually specifying these groups. And also these vulnerable groups are sometimes presented as homogeneous group. There are no verification in between the specific groups, and they are not taken in consideration through intersectional, let's say, dimension. Few tools are also in accessible formats, not mentioning that not all have this accessibility statement that are in line with web content accessibility guidelines. Some other formats are probably also missing. The second big topic was the health issue. So we find that many tools focused on individual preparedness and raising awareness about risks. So, but on the other hand, this material did few targeting physical and mental health challenges. So individual mental health and physical challenges. Something that was maybe obvious is that tools related to COVID-19 emphasize more prevention of infections and supported physical and mental well-being overall. The last but not least, we focus on some general ideas or general also views. So we have spatial, let's say, view, or so we find that many tools were state centralized and very few were targeting cities. So we think, or that was shown through the tools, that there is a need for more city-related tools that localize the, let's say, preparedness in the cities with, let's say, evacuation streets and so on. The second one is focused on sustainability. We find out that many tools and COVID-19, especially related tools, were no longer available or they were not updated, so they were not useful anymore. There is also lack of cultural and social dimensions of the disasters and crisis management. We found that the most of the disaster crisis management was based on technological issues, and we think that more ethnographic fieldwork is needed here to clarify how people experience disasters and crises. And the last one is we find that there is really few co-creative, participatory and inclusive development of the tools. So we think that an inclusive collaborative approach is needed, what we are also doing now through the boards that we founded. I will pass the words to Andrew right now and to breakout rooms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Usha and Ursula. as with the trainings, there's a huge range of tools and approaches. There's some significant challenges, and exactly as was just said, we really want to build on what's there. Partly because we want to sort of not repeat some mistakes, but we want to really understand what's actually needed and how we make these tools sustainable and accessible and relevant. And so that's where all of you come in, and that's where this discussion comes in, and hopefully provides us a really good basis for the next coming stages of the Sonar-Cities project. We really want to hear about your experience of using tools and trainings, but also what it is that you need and you would like to have. And so that's how this is going to work. Is there are 3 breakout rooms. And in a minute, they will be opened, and you will be able to choose the room with the subject that you want to discuss. So the 3 breakout rooms will look at preparedness, so tools and trainings in their focus ahead of the crisis. Tools and trainings during the crisis will be the second breakout room. So that's looking at how tools and trainings can help us with crisis response. And then the final breakout room 3, looks at recovery. So how can tools and trainings support our work after the crisis? And throughout these discussions, we want to look at this key question, which is what information, knowledge, and capacity is needed at this stage of the crisis, depending on whether you're looking at before, during, or after, and in what format, what language. How do you want to access that? Go to your breakout rooms the second when they open, introduce yourselves and discuss that question. And there will be someone from the team. There'll be 2 people from the team in each breakout room, and they are there to facilitate the discussion, but also to take notes. The breakout room discussions will not be recorded. We will be taking notes, and when we come back to plenary, to the whole group in about 15 or 20 minutes, we will have feedback from each room. And then we will go into open discussion. So we have some further questions to look at when we go into the open discussion. And so without further ado, we will open the breakout rooms. So thanks, everybody. I hope that was a useful discussion. The one that I was in was certainly really interesting. We're going to do a little bit of feedback from each of the groups now, and then we will still have 25 minutes or so to discuss together as a group. So I'm looking forward to hearing what came up in all of your chats. Can we start with some quick feedback of what was discussed in breakout room 1, which is focusing on before the crisis preparation?
Yes, so we had a very lively and interesting discussion that touched upon multiple points. We started with the idea that preparedness significantly mitigates impact. So our participants, which were various experts from various fields that deal with preparedness and vulnerable groups, there was an agreement that preparedness is important because it directly reflects into how big or severe the impact will be. And then the discussion sort of began first with the idea of how vulnerable people can actually be drawn in to participate in more online tools, as this is becoming more of something we try to appeal in as to create this resilience, but people still don't have this natural instinct or desire to, in their everyday life, just consider, oh, maybe I should do an online training. There were ideas about what kind of sources pose legitimacy and authority towards people to actually take them into account on a daily basis. And so when asking the question, what sort of information and what sort of source would you require to actually start embedding this awareness into your everyday life, one of the participants talked about having a well-known entity that has authority in a field creates a information sharing tool that already has weight within its audience. But again, then we come to the question, as always, how do we draw in more people? We are seeing now this need for increasing that. And then finally, we ended on various ideas about the importance of community and integrating tools within communities, because people, especially people with various vulnerabilities, often are part of specific communities tailored to their needs and social situations. And if tools could be integrated, perhaps to foster informal structures that create awareness among communities, that would be already an actionable step towards creating resilience within a community. The example was given of some sort of tool that creates an informal network where somebody knows that the neighbor 5 floors up has, for example, a mobility impediment, so that if there is a disaster, the fire brigade would know to first go there. But again, the main idea still centers around what would draw people into creating an awareness that they need to be partaking in training, and that there needs to be preparedness fostered in times of non-disaster to prepare for disasters themselves. Oh, and just very interestingly, the last note, I almost forgot about this because this was read as the room's closed. I mentioned briefly the disaster preparedness booklets that were sent out by the Dutch government, and one of the participants said that their daughter lives in the Netherlands and was actually very panicked by this tool. Wondering, rather than saying, oh, okay, this is something for safety, the first reaction might be, oh, is something going to happen? And it may provoke panic. And so this discussion that I find very interesting was being opened up of, okay, but then how do you propose new ideas and tools to foster preparedness without first creating fear or panic that might actually hinder the progress in being prepared for a scenario like that?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Selma. Did anyone else have anything crucial that they wanted to add from breakout room 3? Otherwise, we'll go to breakout room 2, which was looking at during the crisis. And so I took a few notes on this, but it was a little bit sporadic because I was jumping in and out. So I'll say a little bit, and then Ursula, perhaps if you wanted to jump in as well, and anyone else. So there was some interesting points made about the lack of information that people often have during a crisis. They don't know where to go, what to do, and what not to do. And this was based on experience of looking at earthquakes in Groningen, but also came up in some of the other concrete examples. And people had said that the most helpful organisations they turn to for information are grassroots organisations, citizen support organisations, rather than governmental or official sources of information, partly because these are often difficult to read, difficult to access. There's an issue around finding trusted sources of information during a crisis, particularly as some platforms that people use to get information don't necessarily have the best checks on the veracity of that information. And so people really want trusted sources. Now, what a trusted source means, of course, varies between groups. There are lots of tools that institutions use to communicate widely during a crisis. And so there's text messages, there's the tools that have been mentioned already, social media, and so on. But what's really vital is spaces where there's peer support. There are issues that were raised around relying on the local language being spoken, which is a crucial issue and a crucial challenge for some communities that don't have access to that language. So certain vulnerable groups, for example, and that's a real challenge that has to be met on. We discussed a little bit the importance of two-way communication. And so hotlines that have been set up during certain crises were mentioned. Also, an interesting point made about the cascade of information. So perhaps more official institutions alerting other organisations, partner organisations, or those in the community who can then reach out to their partners and their clients and like I said, cascade the important information down. There's an interesting question, I think, there about what tools and trainings we can use to actually help with those processes and make them smooth, make them effective. And there was another point about how we reach people who are not already in contact or are not already connected to some of those grassroots organisations or partner organisations. That's a perennial challenge that I think often comes up in these sorts of discussions, but we don't necessarily have the answer to them just yet. Ursula or anyone else from that group, I think I missed a few things because I was jumping in and out between groups a little bit, but did you want to add any?
Thank you. Maybe just the last point. I think this was, the main question, as you said already, so people who are well informed and who are inside important parts of the community or are there, there is an active network is something, but on the other side there are people who are completely invisible and who are not in many aspects are not seen as members of communities. So there was an idea that we should need intermediaries who would, in a way, connect this maybe institutional response and information with people who are marginalized, invisible. And so we would need somebody in between, or maybe we would need to engage or focus much more on fostering the community ties.
Thanks, Ursula. And let's hear from breakout room 3, recovering from the crisis.
Yes, I will present what we talked in the breakout room 3. So actually, we had first a little bit of silence at the start of our discussion, because recovery phase, as we found out also like later in the discussion, is not so well covered. Not by the funding, and also then later in the work also not. So we started the discussion by different examples from the world, from Europe, also from Africa and from Asia, with different examples of how communities were recovering or trying to recover after some epidemics or disasters in general. So what we found out, or what it was said, that recovery phase is usually extremely underfunded, and if it is funded through different smaller scales, like funding of some small enterprises and some small businesses. And this is actually good, because they are usually co-created with the communities, but they are like really on the small scale, like also with connections from household to household. And maybe also in this kind of way, like local councils and small networks are built to deal with the phase after the crisis. Then it was said also that we can see a really huge impact in the recovery phase on mental health, and that mental health support is really needed in this time, because after the disaster happens, there is some time when also like a lot of institutions and also volunteers from the outside of the community are coming, and then after this is gone, people are left by themselves. And this is the time when they really need support, and it really impacts their mental health. There was also one suggestion that if training would be made for the recovery phase, it could actually be made like with the phase of preparation, so that it would cover both phases, actually, that it would already go to recover, but also to how to prepare for the next one, if I understood that correctly. What else also, like yes, to engage with local community, to ask them like what they need, what they were missing, maybe also throw a party. There was one example, just for people to engage with each other, to talk about their mental health, what they experienced during the disaster or crisis.
Wonderful, thank you for that. I think that point about how the recovery sort of links directly into preparation and the response to the following crisis really interesting and really useful, because of course these timeframes are not, in reality, they don't sort of compartmentalize in such a neat way as in the discussion today, but it's really iterating for the next phase of preparedness and the next phase of response, based on listening to what people need and what they didn't get last time round and how they were communicated with. I think that's really interesting and really crucial, and I think speaks to exactly what we're trying to do in Sonar-Cities, right? So that's thank you for that. We have about 10 minutes left for more discussion and more reflection. So I have a couple of questions that I wanted to pick up around, firstly, how we can ensure the tools and the training that we develop in Sonar-Cities and elsewhere can be really sustainable. So how they can be really useful, how they can be maintained, and how they can perpetuate, and they're not just sort of left to gather dust. But also, how do we establish effective training and knowledge transfer that can reach the appropriate people and is accessible to the appropriate people. So those are things that I want to sort of hold on to in the discussion. But I think it'd be useful first to hear any reflections that anyone's had based on what they've heard, either in their own breakout rooms or hearing what was discussed in some of the other rooms. Does anyone have any thoughts they wanted to share? Yeah, Tamara.
I wanted to sort of pull out that point that you ended on about recovery and its relationship to preparedness. I think, in Sonar-Cities, we're really focused on populations experiencing vulnerabilities. And I think that many of us, both within the consortium and outside of the consortium, have seen instances in which people are massively adversely affected by epidemics or by disasters. And those vulnerabilities can be cumulative. If there isn't assistance or some kind of effort to help people pull their lives back together from a situation of not being able to cope, the next time you have some kind of emergency, be it another epidemic or a disaster of some sort, you've already got sort of a group or groups of people who are still trying to pull their lives together from the last episode. And so those kind of vulnerabilities can become cumulative. And thus, I think, we're not only trying to, it's a little bit here preaching to the choir, but, we are in situations of trying to convince, public health authorities and other kinds of actors to put resources into, for instance, tools and trainings associated maybe with recovery. And I think that I guess what I'm trying to sort of underscore is an argument that it's important to deal with those recovery issues because those vulnerabilities may only be compounded the next time you have something, and there will be a next time. So I just
Thanks, Tamara. Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting point about how those vulnerabilities compound. So how, I guess the challenging question then is how do we develop a set of tools and a set of training that can really incorporate that and really and help various organizations and groups to work that through and to stop that being kind of cloudy or too complex, but to really make it something we can address.
I think that is where, some of the work that's being done both in Sonar-Cities and outside of Sonar-Cities on co-creation could be really important to mobilize. In helping communities think about, okay, well, what is it there in individuals? What do we need to kind of pull ourselves back together and to prepare for the next time? So, I think that's not really an answer, but it's, I think, a pathway that could be productively used. And I think it's going to have to be some kind of a multi-pronged approach. So,
wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Danny, you've had your hand up for a little while. Do you want to jump in?
Yes, thanks a lot. Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on the same point. It was a very important point that was made about the linkage between recovery and preparedness. And I actually was thinking about in terms of that as soon as a crisis is over, we want to go, as quickly as possible back to normal. And so we don't want to really remember. You can even see it now with COVID. Like we have a bit of a hesitation and resistance almost to think back about that very hard time. And that flies at the face. That's exactly a challenge to preparedness and to, you have to remember in order to prepare. You have to link these two things, exactly also what Tamara said. And so I was thinking in terms of a tool is to create a sort of a disaster memories and the remembrance of those events. It has to be installed, and also maybe for people who are more vulnerable, that's a different kind of remembrance than for other populations because it may impact them differently, and we don't know exactly much about what their temporality is in that sense. And you can also think about remembers in the landscape in terms of monuments or plaques or little descriptives of here was a flood and these people were affected, and that we and the other part of that is that something that's often forgotten in the recovery phase is basically evaluation, and reflection on what did it mean. And that's also related to the same point. So that was more of a follow-up, but also a few tools. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. It's interesting. Did anyone can I come to some of the partners who looked at the tools of the training? Did many of the things that came up? I mean, I know there were lots, and so they may not kind of be at the on the top of your head, but any of those tools, any of those trainings, kind of speak to that point around creating that kind of archiving that kind of memory and experience, or linking the recovery phase to the preparedness phase. Annette.
Well, not during the discussion that we have now, but it just happens to be the case that 1 hour before this meeting, I was in a kind of stakeholder meeting, as being a stakeholder, invited by a research bureau or consultancy bureau that had the assignment to look at the big institute in Groningen, the Institute for Mining Damage in Groningen. And this consultancy organization was assigned to look at the future of this institute, because at a certain moment the mining-induced earthquakes are supposed to stop, or all the damage will maybe be someday will be all repaired. And they're already thinking now ahead at that time what to do with all the knowledge they have now gathered, not only about these earthquakes, but also how to deal with all the bureaucracy and the damage repairs and the compensations and the social support, all the knowledge and experience they have collected in this big institute now. It's very big. And how to safeguard that for the future if other crises or other, for example, climate-induced damages occur. So I found that really interesting that you are thinking about that now, because that's exactly what they are starting to think about now, how to save all this information and knowledge they have now.
No, that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, really interesting. Does anyone else have any reflections on that question about kind of maintaining that kind of memory, or indeed any other points that were raised? I can see someone else has got a raised hand, but my screen's not telling me who it is. Does someone just want to jump in?
Yes, we've done some research on some memories during the floods and everything. Of course, in the places where, let's say, I will talk about floods are, let's say, perpetuating all and over again, there exists a kind of memory and they are well aware. But in some cases, and in cases of climate imposed weather changes and everything, it's very difficult because, for example, in one case, we had the floods that are really surprising the population there because they never happened there. So there was not this transfer of memory somehow. So only, let's say, we can do a transfer of memory from one place to other, and let's say how they're dealt with these floods. But in some cases, there is no previous, let's say, event of any disaster. So there is no also any relation to memory. And also, although there are some places that have this memory of flooding, people sometimes they'll build all over again in the same place, although they to handle with these memories and use them for experience and so on. So in some cases it's very difficult.
Thank you, Ursha. Yeah, really interesting points. We're going to start wrapping up because we only have a couple of minutes of our allotted time left. Before I move on just quickly to some next steps, did anyone else have any other points that they wanted to make? Any reflections, any thoughts? Anyone think that it's completely barking up the wrong tree, going in the wrong direction to try and sort of link these timeframes together, or think it's a red herring?
Hello,
Yeah.
My name is Gop Deshmukh, so I'm calling from Wester. I'm thinking something that might sound trivial, but we all read adventure books and stories, and what comes out often, and what I grew up with, is legends about disasters. like in storytelling, where people always tell that in that legend it said that if this happened, that would happen. That's the long-term way of transferring information. So I don't know if anybody worked on or is working on socially on legend building that has the warnings, the things to do, and the things to watch out for. That has gone not into formal or but very informal and social way of passing on knowledge over time, long time, hundreds of years.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that's a really marvelous point to end on. Thank you so much for that. The using stories, using legends to understand these things and pass on our knowledge. That's I agree with Tamara. They're really wonderful points. So thank you. I found that a really rich discussion. I thought there were some really interesting points, some really useful reflections. As I said, this all feeds into the coming stages of Sonar-Cities, and so we are in the process now of co-creating tools for disaster response and preparedness. We at Work Package 5 in Amsterdam are starting to gather our thoughts and build the MOOC, the training that's going to come out of this as well. And so this has been a really rich, really useful discussion for exactly that. This is the third webinar with Sonar-Cities. We will be having over the course of 2026 3 more webinars, which will speak to other issues and themes that come out of the Sonar-Cities research. I really hope you can come back and be part of those as well. The final thing that I wanted to share, which I've just put into the chat box here, is our feedback form. It really helps us if you can tell us what you thought of the webinars. We had some really useful feedback from the last webinar, which has fed into how we've shaped and framed this current webinar. So please do tell us what you think. It really does help us make sure that these are really useful components of the project. But with that said, and without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, and I really hope you have a pleasant rest of your afternoon. Goodbye, everybody.